Welcome back to Horror Movies.
Today, I will be showing a horror/thriller film for 2010 titled The Ward. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie starts in North Bend Psychiatric Hospital, where a board with Tammy written on it hangs outside a room. Tammy is a young psychiatric patient. That night she is on her bed when she hears footsteps approaching her room. She is frightened and quickly moves to a corner. As the lightning and thunder strike outside, Tammy screams as a shadow stops right in front of her door. Just then an unseen creature chokes her to death as she struggles in its grip. In the next scene, we see a young lady running from the police through the woods. Dramatic music plays in the background when she reaches a farmhouse and lights its curtains on fire. The two policemen passing by see the house on fire and rush towards it. There, they see the young woman quietly sitting in front of the burning farmhouse. As they approach the woman, she tries to move away, so they forcefully arrest her. Next, she is taken to North Bend Psychiatric Hospital in an ambulance and is cuffed in a stretcher. The hospital staff takes her to a room and two nurses undress her to take pictures of her bruises and cuts. After that, she is dressed in a hospital gown and one of the nurses asks her name. Kristen. She replies. They fill up her registration form and watch her as she showers. A big guy who introduces himself as Roy takes her into an elevator and asks her to follow the rules in a strict voice. Kristen comes across several mentally disturbed patients in the hallway. Roy takes her to the remote ward of the hospital and introduces it as her new home. A tough-looking nurse named Lunt grabs her hand and takes her to her room. On the way, she sees 4 other female patients of her age in the lobby. The nurse takes her to Tammy's old room, erases Tammy's name, and writes Kristen on the board. Lunt leaves her to rest. Kristen sleeps and the screen goes black. While asleep, Kristen dreams of a young lady, handcuffed in the dark basement. In the next scene, an unseen force pulls Kristen's blanket, waking her up from sleep. Kristen searches for the blanket and finds it under the bed along with a few pieces of beads, presumably from a bracelet. The next morning, a man comes into her room and introduces himself as her therapist, Dr. Gerald Stringer. Lunt also enters the room with her medicines. Kristen questions them if anybody was there in the room last night. Both of them deny as the rooms are always locked from outside. The nurse gives her medicine but Kristen refuses to take it. Lunt stares at her and tells her that it is not a request. Kristen, however, throws the medicine on the floor and crushes it with her foot, insisting she is fine and doesn't need any medications. Kristen is now in the lobby where she meets other patients, Sarah, Emily, Iris, and Zoe. In the very first conversation, Emily asks her if she will save them, but Iris stops Emily and asks her not to scare the new girl on her first day. Roy then takes her to Dr. Stringer's cabin. As they talk, Dr. Stringer asks Kristen about the first thing she remembers. She reveals that she only remembers the fire on the farmhouse the previous day and doesn't remember any of the past memories. The doctor tries to inquire about the burned farmhouse, as it turns out she has written the address of it on her palm. But Kristen cannot remember anything. The doctor explains that the root of the problem is emotional trauma, but Kristen insists she is not emotionally traumatized and requests him to set her free. As the two talk, she cleverly steals the knife from the doctor's table. Cut to the next scene, Roy stares at Kristen from the door, as she pretends to eat the medicines. As soon as Roy leaves, she spits them out and hides them inside her pillowcase. She then takes out a knife from under her mattress and uses it to unlock the door to her room. She walks down the lobby and is trying to unlock another door when Roy catches her and forces her to go back to her room. At night she again dreams of a teenage girl, handcuffed with chains in the dark basement. She wakes up to the noise of footsteps walking towards her room. Someone stands outside the door, but when she looks through the opening, she sees no one. The next day, Roy gives her some new clothes. She dresses up and visits the other patients in the canteen. When she asks them about their story, Emily replies that everybody here is crazy just like her. As they talk, Kristen realizes that the girls are not as normal as they seem to be. Sarah is in the hospital's garden trying to seduce the staff while Emily and Iris talk to Kristen about Dr. Stringer's experimental therapy. An old couple stares at them through a window. Kristen tells the girls about someone walking outside her room last night, but Iris claims that is impossible as no one has night privileges. Later at night, when all of them are dancing and having a good time, suddenly, the lights go off, scaring everybody. We see glimpses of a strange deformed figure and Zoe hugs Kristen in fear. The next day, after Nurse Lund leaves the ward, Kristen sneaks into the nurse's cabinet and checks the files and cabinets. Emily also joins her and steals the pack of cigarettes. While leaving, Sarah warns Kristen to watch out as she is new there. In the next scene, all of the 5 patients are taking a shower together. Kristen is alone at last when suddenly, a strange deformed figure attacks her, making her yell in fear. Hearing the scream, the nurse rushes to the shower, to find Kristen weeping and the other 4 women scared. Lund then injects a frightened and shocked Kristen with a drug which makes her go unconscious. A man takes her to a dark room, where Dr. Stringer puts her through electroshock therapy. When Emily wakes Kristen up the next morning, she seems to be lazy, sad, and confused. After lunch, everybody meets Dr. Stringer for a session where he asks them if they have anything to say. Emily asks what he did to Kristen and why didn't Tammy return. Kristen inquires about Tammy and Iris answers, Tammy was the last one to get out. The doctor then asks about the shower incident. Sarah claims she didn't see anything, whereas Emily says she believes Kristen. After the session, Iris happily approaches Kristen and Emily and claims she is being released, but no one believes her. Right after, Iris goes to Dr. Stringer's cabin and says she is feeling better than before and is getting along with everybody. The doctor shows Iris her drawing book, where she had drawn some sketches of Nurse Lund, Dr. Stringer, and the ghost-like figure standing in the passage. Dr. Stringer tries the new hypnotherapy with her this time and asks her about her house. She answers that she lived in a small white house. The doctor mentions the date September 3, 1958. In the next scene, the doctor asks a ward boy to take Iris from his cabin, but they notice her missing from there. Then we see a deformed figure moving her, tied to a wheelchair. It takes her to an operating room as Iris cries and begs it to stop. The entity then stabs her eyes with a long operational tool. Iris doesn't come back to the ward that night. Kristen tries asking the nurse but to no avail. The next day, Kristen goes to Iris's room where she finds her sketchbook in which she had drawn the sketches of every patient she has met in the ward. While turning the pages, Kristen finds a sketch of the same deformed figure with the name, Alice Hudson, written on the top. Kristen takes out the pieces of the bracelet which she found under her bed the first night and arranges the beads which spell Alice. Later, in the session with Dr. Stringer, she inquires about Alice and claims Alice was the ghost who attacked her in the shower. Dr. Stringer dismisses her questions and asks Kristen to find answers herself. She then inquires about Alice to the other patients. Everybody seems to know about her, but nobody is willing to talk about Alice. Emily finally reveals Alice was one of them but is now gone. Kristen then tells the girls they should run out of the hospital at night, but Zoe claims Alice won't let them leave. That night, she and Emily open up a vent in the toilet with a coin. They both crawl through it and end up in another ward. Then they run to the basement and hide in a room. Kristen notices the cabinets shaking and checks if it's Emily, but sees a mysterious hand appear. Scared, she runs away from that room and stops when she reaches the lobby of the hospital. When she is about to escape through the main door, Alice reappears in front of her. Startled, Kristen falls backward and hits her head, going unconscious. The following day, Kristen wakes up with a heavy head and explains to Emily that if they don't escape they will end up like Iris. While the big guy tightens the vent opened by Kristen, Sarah approaches and asks him to date her but he refuses. The girls are now in the lobby when Sarah and Emily get into an argument. Sarah leaves the lobby and on her way, sees Alice in her mirror. Frightened, she runs to the kitchen and hides. However, Alice's ghost catches her and cuffs her to a bed as it did with Iris. She then kills Sarah mercilessly with high electroshock frequency. Meanwhile, Kristen and Emily search for Sarah throughout the place. Kristen notices Alice's initials written on Zoe's toy and asks her what it is. Zoe bursts out and explains that it was Tammy's idea to write Alice's name on her doll to get rid of the bad Alice, who hurts them all the time. She then reveals that other girls had tortured Alice before her death in Tammy's room. A flashback of the night shows us Alice being called to Tammy's room. The girls cover her head with a pillowcase and suffocate her to death. When asked about why they did it, Emily just says that Alice was bad. She leaves the lobby and goes to the washroom. She takes a knife out of the sink and is about to slit her wrist when Kristen and Zoe appear there and stop her. But before they can act, Alice appears behind Emily, holds her hand, and slits her throat. Emily eventually bleeds to death. Kristen then comes up with a plan to take Zoe hostage and urge Nurse Lund to open the door, but the big guy suddenly appears in the elevator and overpowers her. They inject her with a drug, make her wear a harness, and lock her up in her room. Somehow, she manages to untie herself and hide behind the door. Soon, a nurse comes to check on her. Kristen knocks her unconscious and rushes outside to hit the big guy too. She along with Zoe rush towards the lobby and elevator but the big guy blocks their way, compelling them to rush back to the ward. Both then encounter the ghost in the passage. They rush down the stairs towards the basement where they find a small elevator. It can only take one person at a time. First, Zoe enters the elevator and encounters the ghost again. When the elevator comes back, Kristen gets on it and ends up in a room. She notices a trail of blood on the carpet and follows it to see Alice standing at the end. She tries to run away, but Alice catches up with her every time. Finally, Kristen manages to strike Alice in the chest with an axe. Then, Kristen goes to the office with a report file of the patient on the table. As she reads the files of patients, Dr. Stringer arrives. She grabs a sharp piece of glass and threatens him to tell her the truth. The doctor finally reveals to her that she is Alice Hudson. She was abducted from her home the night of September 3, 1958, and left in the basement of the farmhouse for 2 months, the same farmhouse she burned down. Because of the trauma, she suffers from multiple personality disorder. She is delusional and has created the personalities of all the girls in the ward. None of them are actually real. Her several personalities overwhelmed her so much that she had to get rid of Alice. The person who took her blanket off at night was herself. The story of Alice is just an elevated lie to get rid of her old traumatized self, and Kristen never existed. Suddenly, the ghost reappears, grabs Alice, and jumps out of the window with her. The scene cuts to the same old couple who were watching the girls a few days back, now sitting in Dr. Stringer's cabin. As it turns out, they are Alice's parents. He explains to them that Alice is no longer a danger to herself. Alice wakes up in bed in the hospital with her parents by her side. Her parents are beyond happy when Alice recognizes them. Then the big guy brings her belongings, the diary, the bunny, and the bracelet. She says to the doctor that she still remembers all the other women and asks if she can leave for home. The doctor explains that she needs to rest for 2 to 3 days before leaving. Then, she opens the sketchbook that she had made out to be Iris's but is actually hers. The movie ends as we see Alice, in her bathroom, being attacked by the deformed figure again. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.